Do you feel like you want to be relevant again?
This is going to sound terrible, but I am relevant.
Yes, we're going to talk about it. Lance Armstrong. Lance is part of the ESPN's famous 30 for 30 series, which was originally started on their 30th anniversary, but has continued on since. Lance is a two-part talking head documentary. This documentary, like many of the other documentaries about Lance Armstrong, sits down with him and talks about his early life and his career, whilst also talking to the people who were pivotal in his life in order to get him his awards, and which he ill-gotten gained. The documentary looks at Lance Armstrong, his career, as well as the people pivotal in his career, if you can say that, and those who helped to eventually bring him down. Now, for people who don't quite know who Lance Armstrong was, Lance Armstrong was a 7-time Tour de France winner, with an asterisk next to his achievements, cancer survivor, and the founder of the Lance Armstrong Foundation and the charity Livestrong. He was docked his 7 Tour de France championships after it turned out that he was in fact doping in order to win them. Unlike other Lance Armstrong documentaries, this documentary was a bit different in that it documented his early life as well as his career within triathlon before he moved on to professional cycling. Now, Lance Armstrong was born to a single parent, and his adopted father, Kevin Armstrong, to which he gets his name, was apparently quite a pushy parent.
That came from 5 years in a military school, very regiment, so I was kind of by the book. The failure of my bringing up Lance, I was the taskmaster, but I didn't put my arms around him enough and tell him I loved him.
And they kind of developed a sense of win at all costs attitude and the drive and the need to succeed, whatever it takes.
A lot of these races in the Texas or in the Southwest, you had to be minimum age to do a triathlon. You had to be 16, so we'd forge my birth certificate.
I understand the reason for the certain age requirements because there's a lot of liabilities. They were going to swim in a lake and this and that, but it meant so much to him.
Get in, just enter, and then kick their ass, like just win. So forge the birth certificate, compete illegally, and beat everybody.
This kind of attitude he developed, a kind of an anger, aggression. These teammates or other people around him are competitors and therefore his enemies, and the way he treats them, this type of parenting definitely affected his personality. However, it also affected how he viewed the world. And one thing Kevin did say was that he wished he put his arm around Lance a bit more, showed a bit more compassion, and that would have affected potentially his personality.
I was always there, always coaching him, always pushing him, but I didn't show him the love that I should have. Lance would not be the champion he is today without me.
A lot of people within that generation found that difficult because men traditionally are supposed to be strong and powerful and just being able to take it on the chin. And that doesn't necessarily help one's mental health. The one thing Lance Armstrong couldn't do well, and especially from an early age, is that he couldn't take losing very well. This kind of understanding of bending the rules was kind of installed in him in a young age, when his mother used to forge his birth certificate in order to get him into competitions because you had to be 16 and he was only 15 at the time. Lance Armstrong was also a very forceful character. He would force himself upon a situation and try and drive and try and piss people off deliberately.
And he was very different. I mean, the other guys that were rivals, I didn't like him, and I didn't want to like him.
And we see that from a young age. It has this determination, but determination to outdo everyone, rather than a determination to be good to people, to help the sport, to improve himself through the use of others, as almost like they are tools to his success. Now, we know from the research that this type of parenting does have an impact upon the child's potential to dope, and we know that Lance Armstrong started doping apparently when he was 21 years old. According to Barr 2005, parenting and the use peers' attitude has a massive impact upon the precedence of us actually doping. There are many things that can help us predict whether someone is likely to dope. They are possibly the most strongest predictors. From the literature, there are many predictors to doping, but they can really be placed into two types of personalities. Those who desperately want it so much they're willing to do anything to win, and those who are, well, too lazy to put the work in and cheat in order to achieve that. Now, we know that in cycling, for instance, there's a lot of abuse of power, especially with the use and through doctors like Michael Ferrari, who heavily focused upon dropping one's weight in order to help performance. Yes, there is a performance advantage for doing so, but only if you can maximize power output. We look at people like Tyler Hamilton, who was one of the teammates of Lance Armstrong. And when he was performing, he was anorexic, or practically anorexic. And he was so scared of gaining weight, he would rip off the stickers on his bike. He would make sure that he had cereal with water and only 20 grams of cereal in order to make sure he maximized his performance. Now that doesn't necessarily help performance, especially with how demanding the tour is. When Lance Armstrong was in his late teens, he transitioned from triathlon into professional cycling, and he joined the Motorola cycling team. One of the reasons why he transitioned was his general strength. And when we mean by strength, we don't necessarily mean by how strong you are, but in terms of strength, endurance. He was able to perform well in water, perform well against the wind, and this kind of demonstrates that he may be useful in a tour setting.
I was the hotshot junior, the poster boy of USA Cycling. First segment was a tailwind, so we were going quite fast, and I wasn't impressed. But as soon as we turned around, he started taking these pulls, and I was like absolutely on the rivet. I was faking it as good as I could, and I'm just relieved that it's over. And he starts yelling at me, "Come on, you fucking pussy, let's keep going."
When teams set them up, they generally have, if you like, the Geraint Thomases, the guys who are able who are able to pull the rest of the team along, who if you like, is the team guy, drags everyone behind them. Before you have your stars and maybe your sprinters in that side as well. What we mean by sprinters, we don't necessarily mean the people who will be super quick, but are super quick over that certain distance, and that helps the team in order to gain points. That's generally how they will set up a team. Yes, there are different variants and ways you set up a team for tour cycling. When Lance Armstrong was with Team Motorola, is that when he first started doping at roughly the age of 21, and what the team were heavily used and what the tour cyclists were using generally at the time was cortisone, which is a stress hormone. And if you have too much cortisone, it basically makes you feel depressed. So that's the negative behind it. Cortisone can improve the mental and physical abilities of an athlete. Corticosteroids, which is what cortisone is, can be taken through tablets, intramuscularly, so injected, or intravenously. It helps the body to get that extra fuel. It makes the body, if you like, have the extra energy in order to be able to do that. In order to be able to do the tour cycling longer, it helps endurance athletes be able to perform better. The 3-week time period to which the Tour de France is. However, the cortisone would start to strip me down and I begin to use my own body as fuel. Dangerous for you to do so. Now, Lance Armstrong claimed that he made the conscious decision to dope. And there are many reasons why people would want to make that decision to dope. There are really two main types of people who want to dope in. Those who are, let's say, cognitively distant, and those who are not. And you generally find people are often forced into doping, or let's say, not forced is the wrong word, but pressured into doping, pressured by a system that doesn't necessarily have their best interests at heart. Tyler Hamilton is a fine example of this, feeling pressured in order to do it by the doctors and the team he was in.
He reached into one of them and pulled out a little red egg-shaped capsule. He said, "Tyler, this is for your health. It's not doping, it's for your health." That point in time characterized exactly what my life had become. There I was on a busy street corner in Madrid, hiding behind dark glasses and a baseball cap, paranoid of being seen. In one hand, I'm holding a secret cell phone with code names and numbers. And the other hand is dripping with blood. And down the street, in a backroom clinic, a doctor I don't trust is stockpiling bags of my blood, all for a bike race.
Now with these athletes, they receive something called cognitive dissonance, in which they have two competing ideas and hold them simultaneously. So in terms of doping, doping might kill me, but I have to do it in order to win. Doping is immoral, but this is what everyone is doing. See what I did there? There are two competing ideas that seem to seemingly marry within that person's mind, their ideas.
But I knew it was wrong, and deep down I was ashamed. But that shame was buried by a new feeling, a possibility. How far can I go?
And in order to help people to do this, they use what they call cognitive reasoning. So they reframe or cognitively reframe that situation and reason it to make it make sense to themselves. In other words, they are lying to themselves, and they do this as a defense mechanism.
It's also about realizing that no matter how bad things get, or how impossible a situation seems, there's always a way out.
Now, with the early research into cognitive dissonance, seems to suggest that and this is the problem we have with most of our research being WADA funded, in the fact that it gives the idea of why would anyone want to dope? It's immoral, why would you want to do it? But there are some people who really just don't have a problem with it and don't have that kind of angst in their minds about it. I get the impression from this that Lance is possibly one of those guys. Now in cycling, there's a term called paniagua, which is Spanish, and it basically translates as to suffice only on bread and water. In other words, competing clean. Now the riders often say that even though doping was banned and only people had a glimpse talking to one another, and this is before the WADA days. WADA is a very new body. It's only been around since the 1990s, believe it or not. But they said it was almost like an open, dirty secret, that everyone knew what everyone, or had an idea or a glimpse of what everyone else was on. And although Lance Armstrong was able to say, oh yeah, I'm this guy, and yeah, we see cognitive dissonance being able to be in play from what he said. For instance, he was incredibly angry and grumpy about how everyone else was on EPO. Now this could be one of two reasons why he was angry about it. It could be cognitive dissonance. He feels that everyone else is cheating, and why should they be allowed to cheat? Yeah, we got to take this with a pinch of salt because hey ho, this is Lance Armstrong. Or it could be the fact that he was pissed off that he wasn't able to utilize EPO because he wasn't able to get it through the current structures and systems he was in. Hence one of the reasons why he went to Michael Ferrari. As it stated, you don't go to Michael Ferrari unless you want to dope. And many of the Team Motorola, when on hearing how well Lance Armstrong was doing, how he was able to drop weight, how he was able to perform better with the EPO in his system, then went to Dr. Ferrari themselves. After he had cancer, what we generally tend to see was Lance Armstrong was able to push back and able to win the Tour de France, and was able to, in theory, create a team around him. And he chose guys who were willing to dope. He started to understand his own power he had over the sport. He started to bully people. He became what is known in the cycling world as a Dominique, as in the dominant rider, the rider who is, in theory, leading and making management decisions upon the team itself. The Lance Armstrong story is a story of abuse of power. He was willing to do anything to destroy people if it meant that he was going to be exposed, or he wasn't the dominant rider, the Dominique within the group. His unique position in world cycling, in that being a guy who transcended the sport, helped to increase this mystique about him. This was the cancer sufferer that a year later came back and won the Tour de France. He was willing to destroy people's careers for his own benefit, himself over competitors. If you weren't with him, you're a competitor, you're an enemy.
The most irrational thing I've ever seen him do was in 2004 when he decided to chase down this Italian rider, Filippo Simeoni.
Il m'a dit tu as tout faux. Tu n'aurais pas dû dénoncer le docteur Ferrari et surtout pas moi. Pour moi, ce n'est pas un problème. J'ai du temps, j'ai de l'argent, et je peux te détruire quand je veux.
But at the same time, the guy was able to create the Armstrong Foundation and Livestrong. And the thing is, when we look at drugs cheats, we often look at it in form of a narrative. This is an evil person. This is a good person. And in the real world, that doesn't exist. Now, these narratives are often created because they're easy to create. They're often easy for our mind to reconstruct these ideas as good, bad, evil, not. It's a bit disingenuous to a certain extent to label all drugs cheats as pure evil. I know some of you are going to stand here and think, oh, yes, they are. Now we've got to give and take context as well. I get the impression from everything I've heard that Lance Armstrong isn't really a nice person. And him arguing the fact that why is everyone other drugs cheats treated differently to him ignores the fact that he destroyed other people's careers to protect his own. For instance, someone like Tyson Gay or Shane Warne, Mike Tyson, and yet we don't hold them in the same regards as people like Justin Gatlin, Maria Sharapova. Even though they may have similar situations they were involved, sometimes the situation, like in Maria Sharapova, was out of their hands or it has a lot of areas of grey. Yet someone like Shane Warne clearly and Tyson Gay clearly doped in order to perform better. Yet we don't hold them in the same regards. Is it because these guys are nice personalities, great on-screen personalities? Was it because of other situations that happened in their life? That's the reason why we don't hold them in the same regards. Now, they raised the subject on how, or some perception of how some of the riders thought that UCI, the head of cycling, were not protecting riders. And this is because they had this idea of the emerta or mafia.
Cycling, they call it omerta. If you have a problem, the mafia would tell you, be quiet, don't say anything, we take care of your family.
But unlike the mafia, they did not protect their own. Mafias are gangsters, so I don't know if they protect their own or not. They're an evil organization.
Was trying to come back after his suspension. He went to Lance and Johan and said, hey, can you put me back on the team? I think, he wasn't even looking for a big salary. I just want to race my bike.
From the teams itself, this partly was from the point of view of protecting the bottom line, getting sponsors involved and making sure that the athletes could remain professional without the glare of suspicion upon them. If you like, they're damaged goods. Why would we want a damaged good? It would give us damaged reputation. The UCI, on the other hand, were on a naive understanding that drugs can't take part in our sport and naively thought that drugs were not in their sport. Now they've gone and cleaned it up. And we hear about the 1998, nicknamed the Tour of Shame, in which so many were caught doping. And then 1999 being the Tour of Suspicion. It's naive for us to think that once we've gone in and found a load of drug cheats, or we have a innovation in our biomedical practices on which we can discover those who are cheating and developments in our technology, that we suddenly have cleaned the sport. In all reality, we're not finding all the drugs cheats, and there will be some that get away with it. WADA only came about in the 90s. These guys have been doping for a very long time and had very much the knowledge above that of WADA. Anti-doping organisations were way behind catching these drugs cheats. If you like, it's a constant chase between WADA and the dopers. And there was a deep mistrust of whistleblowers, and that's still permeating within WADA. And it's a shame really they have this deep mistrust. It's an old-fashioned opinion that, in my opinion, ruins our efforts to help clean the sport. This has been shown by Doping Top Secret documentary on the IOC, but also on WADA themselves.
Other people were dealing with the whistleblowers, not me.
This leaves whistleblowers dangerously exposed and potentially puts them at harm's way in such systems like Russia, for instance, where they've been known to kill people who blew the whistle upon their doping program. The UCI held massive suspicion about these whistleblowers. Many of them have been caught doping, and the fact that some of them who did not come out previously were also on drug taking programs themselves, or allegedly on so. The UCI also wanted to help marry them, make themselves more united with WADA. WADA's unwavering, unchangeable position that sometimes flies against some of the new research we have on whistleblowing, and it's unwilling to listen to that evidence that in theory may help us catch cheats. It's actually potentially hindering us, and we find this a lot in Kelsey Erickson's work. If you looked at the true doping dilemma, if I come out as a whistleblower, I'm potentially alienating myself, alienating my friends. I'm putting my friends at harm's way. But at the same time, this idea that I'm wrestling with, that I have to do the right thing in order to protect the integrity of sport, my integrity, my performance. But in reality, many of these guys get labelled as the drug cheat, and they themselves are probably more hampered than the sport itself, possibly more villainised than the sport itself. And is one of the reasons why many people in a doping program, even though they would want to blow the whistle, think it's too dangerous to do so. That, and they potentially, in some situations, put themselves in physical harm. For instance, Yulia Stepnova now has to live in a secret location so that her family or herself do not get targeted. The other reason why UCI were unwilling was that, or UCI was skeptical of these claims, was the fact that Lance Armstrong was the poster boy of cycling. 7-time Tour de France winner. The guy who came back from cancer, the guy who transcended his own sport. He was, if you like, the poster boy that marketed cycling to the rest of the world. When it came out that Lance Armstrong cheated, it broke the minds and hearts of many people. Looked up to him as a role model. If you like, Lance Armstrong is the flawed icon. In synopsis, and it can probably be best be explained by one of the ESPN writers themselves, in that this documentary highlights the reason why many Americans have just given up on Lance.
It might be one lie because you answer it once, or in my case it might be 10,000 lies because you answer it 10,000 times. And then you take it a step further and you reinforce it, and hey, fuck you, don't ever fucking ask me that question again, right? And then you go sue somebody, that's another, and then it just, so that's why it was 100 times worse.
The show details the former 7-time Tour de France champion, and is now regarded as a disgraced doping cheat, who was the poster boy of the sport's darkest period. Although, while many of us plead for him to be forgotten, the story still has an emphasis, it still has a box office appeal, and in reality should still be taught as an example of how not to do things. The documentary was met with mixed reactions, with some new revelations that were unveiled, such as Armstrong claiming he first doped at 21 years old. It seems as if Armstrong's promise of telling the truth could be wishful thinking, and it went too easy on him. We got to remember that many of the people around him consider him to be a narcissist or have narcissistic tendencies. Yet again, as I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist and have not seen the guy in person, I do not know, but I should take that into account. The documentary also has some pretty incredible access to Lance and the people closest to him during this period, whilst also pulling off the great knowledge of journalists and other professional riders and other people who may have aided the documentary information, although some of it was opinion, but very wee bit of it. Due to Zenovich's involvement, Lance is a high quality and engaging documentary. There is a lot to unpack from it, a lot of introspection, and Lance, the story written in it, is actually fairly well crafted retelling of Armstrong's life. However, despite its long length, it being 2 1.5-hour documentaries, but yet again, we focus sometimes too much on trying to get that information in a short space of time. We actually miss the most of the information, so sometimes shorter documentaries are shitter than the long documentaries. They're worse off because of their length being too short. And you find that a lot with YouTube videos in general. People want that information in 2 minutes, and you try and explain that in 2 minutes is almost ridiculously impossible. Some may see that despite its long length, there are certain stones that have not been overturned. That may be room for another documentary. However, the documentary does lead us to having a broader conversation about doping, how we treat people, and the mindset of dopers in general. Many viewers, on the other hand, may see this as basically something to feature Lance Armstrong's effort to resurrect his reputation, and to a certain degree, they may be correct. There were many parts of the documentary that gave us a glimpse into his life, but in reality was probably quite irrelevant. Him talking about entering an half Ironman. Does that add to us knowing about how he doped, about how he likes to spend time exercising? There was a good 10 minutes of good 20 minutes of the actual film talking about swimming. Does that tell me much about Armstrong's? Well, it tells me much about Armstrong's life now, but not then in the darkest period, which is what we desperately want to know. And some of these irrelevancies, although detailing a certain amount of how much money the guy's got, is kind of irrelevant, and we could have focused on more things or gained more knowledge of certain areas. Yet again, we might have to leave this for another documentary. All in all, I give Lance 30 for 30 a score of 96.9.